Hello everybody. So I finally finished reading From a Buick 8 by Stephen King. I feel like it's taken me forever to read this book, when really it's probably just been a few months. There's a book that I've talked about before which took me years to read. So hi, I'm Debbie, if you haven't been here before. Stay, subscribe, it's fun over here. I talk about books a lot because I read, but I also sing a little bit. From a Buick 8, let's get on with that good old blurb, shall we? There is a terrifying secret shrouded in Shed B in the State Police Barracks in Statler, Pennsylvania. A secret which for the past 20 years has drawn the troopers terrified yet irresistibly tempted to look at its beautiful chrome fenders, silver grille and exotic exhaust system. Now, young Ned Wilcox has started coming by the barracks, mowing the lawn, washing the windows, shoveling snow. It's the boy's way of holding onto his father, recently killed in a strange road accident by another Buick. One day, Ned peers through the windows of Shed B and discovers the family secret. And like his father, Ned wants answers. He deserves answers. And the secret begins to stir. I really didn't know what I was getting into when it came to this book. I knew nothing going in. The thing that really got me interested was the "Come close, children, and see the living crocodile" that was written on the back. The car in question is a 54 blue Buick Roadmaster. At least that's what it looks like. So the point of the car is that it... Whoops. Yeah, the point of the car is that it really shouldn't be a car. Even though it kind of looks like a car, it shouldn't be able to move or work like a car. Because when they find the car and open it up and look at it, they realise that everything is a facade. And that, you know, there's nothing in there that would make the car move. And yet it does. It's very, very weird. It's all done as kind of a continual conversation in kind of the present, which in this case was about 2005, I want to say. Where's the page that tells me what year it came out? First published in Great Britain in 2002. But I swear towards the end it actually says it's like 2005 or 2006, so it might just be a jump to the future. But yeah, it's present is the mid-noughties basically. It's all a conversation with the young Ned Wilcox. You've got quite a few conversations with him as he tries to understand what happened to his father and the secrets around Shed B, which is where the Buick 8 is stored. In the beginning, the car is abandoned by a man in a bat coat that they have no way of tracking down. He's just like this mysterious figure in the night. And it's abandoned at essentially a petrol station, I think it is. And obviously there's no way of returning the car, so they just put it in this shed. And yeah, weird things start happening. I felt like I got into it quite quickly, but there were points when it just felt like not much was happening, but it was. Because I got to the last couple of hundred pages and I was just like, oh, so this shouldn't take me long to do it, but it did take me longer than I thought it was going to. It definitely is one that kind of picks up a little bit more towards the end of the book. The majority of what you hear about Ned on the back happens in like the last 100 pages. Basically the entire book is done as like a continual conversation. Oh, what's going on there? Hello again. We might have moved slightly because for a second it looked like my SD card wasn't in properly, and then I checked it and it was, and then it looked like the battery was dying, so I replaced the battery. So yeah, it might just be a slightly different framing. So, where was I? Yeah, it's just done as a continual conversation with Ned from lots of people who worked with his father. And they're basically explaining kind of, I think it's about 25 years worth of events on the barracks and how they deal with the car and what's happening in the shed. First, they discovered that it's technically not a car that should be working. So then they start treating it like it's not a car, and then some slightly paranormal events start to happen. They realise that the car, I say car loosely, seems to have its own like temperature control. Basically, they can tell that something weird's about to happen when the temperature in the shed that it's locked in drops. and the temperature drops no matter the weather outside. It could be an absolutely boiling day, and yet the temperature in the shed, it's like it's getting ready for the paranormal events. The temperature just drops lower and lower and lower, even if the heat is rising on the outside. It's really interesting. Yeah, no tea today. I'm on squash. Yeah, it's just so bizarre. But I did enjoy it. It's interesting that on the back, I mean, I know they talk about Stephen King here, but they're talking like accomplished storyteller, one of the great storytellers of our time. The fact is, though, the entire book is done like a storyteller. That's essentially what they're doing. When you're getting the conversation with Ned and the people who are talking to him, all the chapters are telling a story. Now, I know that probably sounds really stupid because it's a story. But it's like because they are telling the story to Ned. Does that make sense? And it's like the different chapters can kind of interrupt a conversation in the storytelling. Because basically there's a couple of chapters where the narrative is interrupted by the present. So it's like now, Archie. And then there's chapters where it just says like, then Eddie. So you're seeing all these different points of view. If it says then Eddie, it means that Eddie is speaking at that point, because Eddie's sharing his version of events. There's also a dog in it, and I think it's one of those things, just like if there's an animal in a horror story, you kind of know what's going to happen. I'm just going to say that. Yeah, I can't find any example of it at the moment. When they're doing the storytelling in the past, because of how they do the chapters, I really don't know how to describe this. Oh, here's one where it says, and then he says, and then it goes now, because that's where the interruption is. And then they kind of continue that conversation in the now, but this chapter is more focused on the present, so it's just a little reference to the past, but it's mainly concentrating on the present, whereas the chapters in the past are all just entirely concentrated on the past. There's no darting forwards. Does that make any sense? But yeah, so basically the past chapters can be interrupted by the present because of the conversation that is continuing throughout. That was really difficult to explain. Hopefully you understand what I mean by that. And if you don't, well, just read it. You'll understand it when you read it. It was just weird and interesting, and it's also the fact that with events in the past, when they start realising that things in the shed might go missing or things might just suddenly appear, and it's at certain points when you realise that even though the characters are basically trying to do their best to just kind of monitor the situation, at times they get a little too invested, and it leads them to making some really stupid decisions. For example, there's a point when something appears in the shed which could only have come from inside of the car. I'll just put it like that. And so they kind of start experimenting into it happening the other way round. So rather than things appearing, things disappearing. It kind of starts when a person disappears. And so they start experimenting by putting objects in the car. When they realise that is working, and that sometimes things do disappear from like the trunk of the car or the main seat of the car, they start experimenting with animals. It's like, is it a gerbil or is it a hamster? I want to say it's hamsters. But they put 2 hamsters or gerbils in the car, and at first they're just like, oh well, they seem to be there, it's all fine. And then, is it about a week later, they realise that one of the gerbils or hamsters has disappeared. One of them has, but one of them is still there. And then there comes a point when another person is thinking about climbing into the car, but they don't go through with it. And yeah, the things they do to protect the secret is interesting. There's also a character who's very sciencey and decides to kind of perform an autopsy of sorts on something that comes out of the car. I say something because we're never really sure what it is. Yeah, it's all very, very weird. How many pages was it? Let's have a look. Yeah, it's 462 pages. The cover is kind of an example of some of the kind of what happens when the temperature drops in the car. There's a kind of a light show that happens because they basically, the temperature drops and then it's kind of referred to as fireworks when the temperature drops and everything goes really weird. It's so weird to describe this book, just because of how I'd love to talk to Stephen King and kind of inspect his mind. I think it's kind of a thing for a lot of horror writers. A friend of the family's is a horror writer, and his name is Mark Morris. I've read 2 of his books, I've talked about them on here, and he's friends with my mum and dad. And once there was a conversation with his wife Nell, and she actually said sometimes she finds it weird to sleep next to him because she knows that he's inspired by dreams and she wonders what on earth is going on inside his head. That's not the conversation verbatim, obviously, but that's basically the gist of it. It made me think about what it must be like to be in a relationship with someone who writes horror for a living, because you must be totally weirded out by the things they come up with. I mean, this is an example where I'm just like, that must have been a dream. Yeah. I'm completely trying to unpack this book in my mind because, as I said, there were some points in that continual conversation where I feel like I wasn't taking that much in. And I don't know if it's just that I glazed over slightly or if it was just certain chapters where there just wasn't as much happening. I think the majority of the slightly scarier stuff happened within the last 100 pages. And I think it's because that bit happens in the present, when you're learning about the history of the car and the, 25 years previous? It just feels very matter of fact, like they're saying. We got this car, we started observing it, we generally tried to leave it alone, but we had people stationed at this shed. It was very hush-hush because we didn't want to make a big deal out of it and we didn't want people investigating it. So it was kind of an open secret within the barracks. And they're just saying, like, this is what happened. So it feels very just, oh, it was just something that happened and this is what they did. You know, they had these secret reports. And even though you have got the whole thing of like the light show and, you know, the fact that the temperature drops and the fact that this car is obviously otherworldly, it's weird how Stephen King is able to make it seem normal. There's a point in the book when I'm just like, it just feels like normal because it's like the characters are speaking their truth. Does that make any sense at all? I think because it's done as a one continual conversation with Ned, it just feels a bit more real than the average storybook. It's such a weird one to talk about, and I don't know why it feels so weird. There's like an unwritten rule just not to go into the shed while it's having one of its light shows because they don't know what's going to happen. And also there's the fact that, you know, they realise that if things are going to go missing or appear, it's going to be during the light show. But that doesn't mean that something goes missing or something appears at every light show, because obviously they're still working. It's a police barracks. It's an unclaimed car. They can't track down the original owner. The person who left it with them is completely untraceable, so they just keep the car. And there are a couple of conversations towards the end of, did they ever think of destroying the car? Just that, having that continual conversation just made it feel a lot more real, like I was like privy to this conversation they were having with Ned all the way through. And the fact is, even though the blurb concentrates on Ned, I feel like the person you're mostly hearing from is Sandy, who is one of the police officers on the barracks. Yeah, I think it does feel like for the majority of the book you're mainly hearing from Sandy, who's the sergeant commanding of Troop D. Yeah, he's the main narrator. Sorry, I'm just reading his title from the internet at the moment because I never would have remembered that by myself. But yeah, in that conversation of like, have they ever thought of destroying the car, you learn very early on when they try just like hitting the car. It's fairly indestructible. There does come a conversation a bit later about whether they can like incinerate it or burn it. But if they want to just like smash it up. They can't do it. It's weird how matter of fact the book is leading up to the final 100 pages, which is when you start to learn a little bit more about Ned. That's what I find blurbs interesting, and how you can feel like you're getting a lot from a blurb when actually it's only like, it's barely even half of it. But I enjoyed it. I definitely want to read more Stephen King, and I do have some more Stephen King on here. I've got The Stand, the completely unedited version of The Stand. The Stand, for the first time, the complete and uncut edition. With a big picture of Stephen King on the back. Because how long is this one? This one's going to take forever. And it's quite small text as well. 1007 pages long. I haven't even read the edited version of The Stand, so this one's going to be interesting. So that's From a Buick 8 finished. So, still reading Deborah Harkness. I'm getting on with that. I've started reading The Eve Illusion on BorrowBox. And the next book on the bookshelf is The Break by Marion Keyes. So that'll be the next one that I'll be starting to take to work. I feel that I've almost said nothing about this book. Though actually I probably have. Supernatural car. That is basically the story of this book. A supernatural car that nobody really knows what to do with, so they just observe until they are forced to go into the shed. That's what I'm saying about From a Buick 8 by Stephen King. If you like horror, you'll like it. I think the concept of it being done as just a full conversation is quite clever, and the way the chapters kind of can interrupt each other when something significant happens in the present. But yeah. Stephen King, From a Buick 8. There were points where I was completely baffled, and I was talking to my dad about it because it was in his collection, and I started talking to him about it, and he was just like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" And I was just like, "From a Buick 8. And he was just like, "Oh, I don't think I've read that one." It was just like, seriously? I got this out of your collection because I'm reading all the books in the house. You know, I picked the books that I hadn't read, popped them on my bookshelf, and I'm literally making my way through all of them. I'd love to read like Carrie someday, or It. I'm sure my dad's got It somewhere. I think it's in his wardrobe. But I must admit, the image of Tim Curry as the clown is burned into my memory. So I have a feeling that's all I'm gonna see when I do actually read it. Yes. But yeah, so thank you so much for watching. I have been Debbie. If you have not subscribed already, please do. We have a lot of fun over here. So thanks for watching. I will see you next week for another video. Stay safe, and yeah, love you all.